This morning, I want to get us started. I want to introduce this series with an observation. Of all of the many things, life-impacting things the Bible teaches us about, perhaps there's no truth we find in the Bible more profound and more life-impacting than the truth that there is an end. The Bible teaches that this world system in which we live does not last forever. There is an end coming that changes everything about life. For example, it changes the way we interact with God. It changes the way we experience. There is no pain or heartache anymore. There is no sickness anymore. There is an end to this world system coming. And in fact, the Bible has much to say about what that end looks like. And what I want to suggest at the outset of this series is that the Bible doesn't speak so much about the end just to satisfy our curiosities. It shares so much about the end to give us peace and boldness and courage in the present. Because when you know how things end, it affects everything about the present. I was watching a condensed replay of a football game the other day. Now, I had watched that game live. It was a big game. And when I watched the game live, I noticed I was anxious. I was tense. I didn't know what was coming. But when I watched the replay, I had none of those emotions. And the reason I didn't experience the same anxiety as I did when I watched it live was because I already knew how it ended. The same is true about life. Christians, if we can understand how it all ends, it has tremendous impact on the way we live in the here and now. And the Bible has, as I said, much to say about what this end looks like. But there is a question. There's a question that comes up every time you bring up this topic of Bible prophecy. It's not just the what of Bible prophecy, because we have a lot of those answers. The question that always comes up is when? When is this going to happen? If this world system is coming to an end, how close are we? Are we talking hours, days, weeks, months, years, decades, centuries? How close are we to this end? That is not a new question. In fact, that question has been asked at least since the first century, because we have record of it. In fact, Jesus' own disciples seemed to be consumed by that question. When is this going to happen? I'll read a verse out of Matthew chapter 24. Jesus was sitting on the Mount of Olives, and the disciples came to him privately. Jesus had been talking about some things that were coming. "Tell us," they said, "when will this happen? And what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age?" What do the disciples want to know? "Jesus, we understand from you that there is an end coming. But when is it going to come?" They wanted to know the answer to the same question that we have. Now, I can just fast forward through Matthew chapter 24 and give you the answer Jesus ultimately gave them. This is found in verse 36. Jesus said, "About that day or hour, no one knows, not even the angels in heaven, nor the Son, but only the Father." What does Jesus tell them? He says, nobody can know when the end is going to come. So now here's what that means to you practically. If you are in a bookstore this week and you see a book on the bookshelf that says something like 21 Reasons Jesus is Going to Come in 2021, see that as a money-saving opportunity. Okay, don't waste your money on it. Why? Because nobody knows when the end is going to come. Jesus said so. However, before Jesus told the disciples that, look what else he said in verse 32 and 33. Jesus said, "Now learn this lesson from the fig tree. As soon as its twigs get tender and its leaves come out, you know that summer's near. Even so, when you see all these things, you know that it is near, right at the door. All right, Jesus tells his disciples, there's no way you can know when the end is going to come. But then he tells them, you can't know when the end's coming, but you can understand the signs that suggest that the end is getting close. The classic illustration of this. Suppose you go to a play and you arrive early for the production of this play. You sit down in your seat and you notice that the stage crew is still putting all the set pieces in place. They're putting props in place. They're busy on the stage up there. Okay, if that's happening when you arrive, you know that the play is not going to start imminently. You know that the play is not about to start because things aren't ready. However, once all of the set pieces have been put into place and all the props are where they need to be, and the stage crew leaves the stage, then you can know the play can start at any moment. While we don't know when the curtain is going to go up on this drama called the end, the Bible does give us set pieces that have to be in place before the end comes. So this morning, I'm going to be sharing with you some of the signs that the end is very, very near. Now, to do this, I want to start with a timeline. They're going to bring it up on the screen for us. There's a timeline that describes some of the events that will take place at the end. You'll see a timeline there. It goes from ages past all the way to ages to come. This is an eternal timeline. Now, if you wanted to plot 2021 on this eternal timeline, it would be in that area called the church age. That's where we are. We're in the church age. The church age began shortly after Jesus ascended back into heaven. The church age will end one day when Jesus comes back for the church. In fact, that brings me to another event that the Bible describes as being part of the end. The Bible describes in 1 Thessalonians chapter 4 something that we refer to as the rapture. That is when Jesus comes back for the church. He removes the church out of the world, marking the end of the church age on earth. We also know that the end describes how there will be 7 years of tribulation on earth. There will be a period of 7 years on earth where God pours out his wrath on mankind. And during that 7-year period, there will arise a global leader. The Bible calls him many names. Perhaps the most popular is Antichrist. This Antichrist will rise to global power, and the world will embrace, follow, and even worship that leader. We'll hear a lot about the Antichrist next week with Jeff Kinley. We also know that at the end of that 7 years, Jesus returns with the church. At the rapture, he returns for the church. When his second coming, he returns with the church. He defeats the Antichrist, he defeats Satan, he defeats evil, and sets up a reign that will take place on this earth. Jesus will reign over the earth for 1,000 years. His throne will be in Jerusalem. We refer to that as the millennial reign of Christ. Now, those are some of the events that will take place at the end. Now, those events point to set pieces that must be in place first. These events cannot take place, as the Bible describes them, until certain things are in place. Now, before I dive into these signs of the end times, I want to confess something to you. This past week has been a very frustrating, maybe is the right word, frustrating week for me. There are many, many signs of the end times that we could talk about. You do not want to be here all afternoon. I understand that. So here's what I've done. I have chosen 3 signs of the end times. And here's one of the ways I chose these 3. I chose 3 signs that until very recently, these signs were considered to be very unlikely or impossible to be true. Okay, so 3 signs. We're going to just dive right in. Sign number 1 is the regathering of the Jews. The regathering of the Jews. Before these events at the end take place, the Jewish nation must be in existence. Now, here's why. Remember that tribulation period that I described to you. The prophet Daniel, in his book in the Old Testament, he tells us that 7-year period of tribulation begins when this global leader, the Antichrist, does something that no other world leader has ever been able to pull off, although many have tried. The Antichrist will successfully broker a peace treaty with the nation of Israel. Now, it also tells us that 3.5 years after he brokers the peace treaty, he'll break it. So it's a short-lived treaty, but he will broker peace in the Middle East. He will broker a peace treaty with the nation of Israel. Now, the reason that's important is because for that peace treaty to be brokered, the nation of Israel must exist, okay? It would make no sense for one of our world leaders today to say, you know, we need to broker a peace treaty with the Babylonian Empire. Why? No, the Babylonian Empire doesn't exist anymore. So for this treaty to take place, as Daniel describes it, the nation of Israel must exist. Now, some of you might say, well, that's no big deal. I know where Israel is. There's a nation there now. Yeah. But the nation of Israel has only existed for about 70 of the last 1,800 years. In the 2nd century, the Roman Empire told all the Jews living in Israel to leave, living in Palestine. They had to leave. In fact, the Roman government in 135 AD issued a decree that if a Jew was seen living in Palestine, they could be killed on sight. So in the 2nd century, Jews scattered all over the world. Now, here's what's interesting about how the Jews scattered. Even though their nation had fallen, even though there was no nation of Israel anymore, there was not a Jewish nation, when the Jews scattered, they maintained their national identity. What do I mean by that? You never run into anybody today, at least who's in their right mind, who would say, yeah, I'm a Babylonian, or I'm an Assyrian, or I'm a Hittite, or I'm an Amorite. Why? Because those kingdoms have fallen. They don't exist anymore. But after the Jewish nation fell, the Jews, scattered all over the world, maintained their national identity. They were still Jews. And then in 1948, many of you know this, on May the 14th, 1948, the Jewish nation was reborn. And by 2009, which was just a few years ago, by 2009, there were more Jews living in Israel than in any other place on earth, and that has not happened since 135 AD. John Walvoord says this about the regathering of the Jews. Quote, of the many peculiar phenomena which characterize the present generation, few events can claim equal significance as far as biblical prophecy is concerned with that of the return of Israel to their homeland. It constitutes a preparation for the end of the age. Israel, God's super sign of the end times, is a clear indicator that time is growing short. One of the set pieces that must be in place for these end time events to take place is the regathering of the Jews in their nation, and that has now happened. Sign number 2, a departure from truth. Before the end comes, there will be, the Bible describes how there will be a great falling away. People will be deceived, and they will abandon doctrinal and moral truth. Let me read a passage out of 1 Timothy that describes this. Chapter 4. The Spirit clearly says that in later times some will abandon the faith and follow deceiving spirits and things taught by demons. Such teachings come through hypocritical liars whose consciences have been seared as with a hot iron. Okay, here's one of the reasons, one of the many reasons, that this set piece is absolutely necessary for the events of the end to take place. When you read the Bible and how it describes how the entire world will follow, embrace, and even worship the Antichrist, an evil person, empowered by Satan himself. When you read how that happens, here's the question that always comes to my mind. How could people be so stupid? I mean, how ignorant, how dumb can you be? Here is an evil man, and yet the entire world will follow, embrace, and even worship this evil man. For that to happen, there has to be a departure from truth. We have to disconnect culture from what is really right and really wrong. Now, I see this in today's culture playing out in 2 ways, and there are many ways. I'm going to share 2 of them with you. First of all, truth is now relative. Truth really doesn't exist anymore because truth is considered to be relative. Our culture, you know this to be true, our culture, there is a general consensus out in culture that truth is subjective and is based on your biases, your feelings, your preferences. I saw the latest illustration of this past week. One of our world leaders was having a conversation with a student, and this student brought up a historical and political item that was incorrect. It was just wrong. So our world leader, instead of correcting the error, our world leader now said this: that is your truth. And your truth should be heard. Your truth should be part of our conversation. No, your truth is a mistake that should have been corrected. Because mistakes need to be corrected. But we live in this culture now where even our leaders are preaching this message that says, you can have your truth and I can have my truth, meaning there's really no such thing as truth. Truth must become relative. We live in a time where facts really don't matter anymore. You're not only entitled to your own opinion, you're now entitled to your own facts. So it's not at all unreasonable to believe that people will follow after things even taught by demons because they will be deceived into following this global leader because it seems right to them. It's their truth. There's another way that this departure of truth is playing out today, and here it is. Good is called evil, and evil is called good. For these events to transpire as the Bible describes them, we must see a moral inversion where what was good is now called evil, and what's evil is now called good, because it's not hard to see that if that takes place, It's not hard to understand how an evil person could become a global hero. If we invert good and evil, then an evil person becomes the good guy. And that's exactly the way the world will perceive this Antichrist. Folks, we have experienced, and I'm going to go even shorter time period than my lifetime. In the last couple of decades, we have seen this moral inversion taking place. There are many examples of this. Perhaps the most compelling example is the changes in our world brought on by the sexual revolution of the last 20 to 30 years. Now, why do I say that? Here's why I say that. There are sexual behaviors today that 50 years ago would have been almost universally condemned, that are now almost universally celebrated. And those who don't celebrate those sexual perversions, they're the ones who are now condemned. I shared this not long ago. There is a movement right now in this country to normalize the behavior of pedophiles. What do I mean by that? Here's what's happening. Pedophiles, those people who would sexually molest children, should not be condemned because they have a, quote, unchangeable sexual orientation. You see, sexual orientation now is an excuse for any and all kinds of sexual perversion. So if someone is a pedophile, they should not be condemned because they were born that way. It's just the way they are. Not 10 years ago, 5 years ago, that would have been universally condemned, and yet it is becoming what is considered to be good. Let me remind you of what the Bible says about this moral inversion that takes place in a culture. Isaiah chapter 5. Woe to those, beware woe to those who call evil good and good evil, who put darkness for light and light for darkness, who put bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter. This inversion has happened, and it's another set piece that prepares us for the beginning of the end. Third sign, sign number 3, globalism. Globalism. What do I mean by that? For the events of the end to take place as the Bible describes them, the world must be a very small place. The world must be small. Now, there are many ways that must be true. I want to share with you 2 of them. Number 1, for the events of the end to take place, there must be a global economy. There must be a global economy. One of the ways the Antichrist, when he or she comes on the scene, got to be an equal opportunity offender here. He or she, when the Antichrist comes on the scene, one of the ways they will rule and control the world is through economic regulation. Let me read to you Revelation chapter 13, verse 16 and 17. This is speaking of the Antichrist right-hand person, the false prophet. It also forced all people, great and small, rich and poor, free and slave, to receive a mark on their right hands or on their foreheads, so that they could not, watch this, they could not buy or sell unless they had the mark, which is the name of the beast or the number of its name. Okay, what is the Bible describing here? In the end, individual purchasing privileges will be regulated and controlled globally. Now, up until relatively recently, there's no way that could have happened. I mean, back in the 1800s, somebody's walking down the street and they go to someone of a certain trade and they walk into their shop and they say, I want to buy that. They exchange currency for that item, that is a transaction done. But today, it doesn't happen like that anymore. Now, virtually most financial transactions, I dare say, are electronic. I went to the Varsity yesterday, and I wanted to pay cash for my hot dog. They don't even take cash down there. If you don't have a means to pay for something electronically, like a credit card, you don't buy anything from the Varsity. Now, here's what's important to understand about that. If transactions are electronic, that means that transactions can be denied or declined based on who's trying to make them. Somebody wants to flag your credit card, all of a sudden you can buy nothing if that's the only way you can purchase things. So, for the first time in history, it's easy to think about how a centralized government could control financial transactions based on who's trying to make them. Here's another way globalism must play out. There must be global communication. When you read about how these events transpire in the end, one thing becomes clear. Everybody in all the world must be privy to what's going on. Revelation chapter 1 verse 7 is one example of this. Look, he is coming with the clouds, and every eye will see him, even those who pierced him, and all peoples on earth who will mourn because of him. So shall it be. Amen. Okay, Jesus has given these words to the Apostle John when he's on Patmos, and John's writing this down. I wonder if John at times must have said, well, whatever you say, Lord. I mean, how is this going to happen? How can somebody in Rome or in Athens see what's happening in Israel? In the first century, that made absolutely no sense. But today, anybody with one of these can stream video live on social media platforms, on YouTube, on a number of other ways. So it's not at all hard to understand now how when something happens somewhere in the world, everyone on the face of the planet will be able to see it and experience it firsthand. There are signs of what's coming at the end. There must be a regathering of the Jewish nation. That has happened. There must be a departure from the truth. Culture must disengage from what is really right and really wrong. That has happened and is happening. And there must be globalism in place for the Antichrist to be able to rule and to reign and to manipulate everyone all over the globe. That has happened. What I'm trying to say is the set pieces are in place. We don't know when the curtain's going to go up. We don't know when the end is going to come. But as Jesus commanded of us, we can see the signs and we can know when it's getting near. And church, we are near. We are near the end. Now, I want to close with a question. It's a very important question to everyone listening to me here in this room and online. Are you ready for the end? Listen to me. No matter what preparation you make in life for whatever event, make sure you're ready for the end. Jesus says this in Matthew 24, returning to where we started. Jesus said, so you also must be ready, because the Son of Man will come at an hour when you do not expect him. Pastor Jeff, how do I get ready? How can I prepare myself for the end that is coming? You must accept by faith what Jesus did to cleanse you and me from our sin. so that we could be reconciled to the God we've offended. Because once the end comes, judgment will be set. And only the righteous can spend eternity with God, and that's none of us. But Jesus the righteous, shed His blood to cleanse us from sin, making us white as snow, so that heaven can be ours for eternity. I'd like to close my time with a prayer for those of you who have not yet placed your faith in Jesus. If the end were to come before the sun sets tonight, you're not sure you're ready for it, I invite you to cry out to your Creator in these next few moments, asking for Him to forgive you and to make you one of His own. Let's bow our heads, close our eyes. If you're the one I'm speaking to, your prayer might be like this one. Dear God, I recognize I stand in need of your forgiveness. I believe Jesus, your Son, died for me, shedding His blood to wash my sins away. And then He rose from the dead. And I'm placing all my trust in what Jesus did for me to cleanse me from my sins so that I can be yours. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. Everyone looking back this way, if that was your heartfelt prayer, I'd like to offer you some additional help to help your understanding of what you did when you placed your faith in Jesus. Back at guest services, which is on your way out over to the left, we've prepared some literature that explains what it means to become a Christian, what it means to place your faith in Jesus. Please go by and receive it from us. There's so much we want you to know and understand, and that's one way that we do that. If you're watching online, we would love to mail this to your home. You can receive that literature from us free of charge if you'll simply go to the website imadeadecision.com. That's imadeadecision.com. There's a form to fill out there. Just fill the form out, submit it to us, and we'll put literature in the mail to your home this week. Thank you for watching this video on First Redeemer's YouTube channel. If you enjoyed it, click like below and leave us a comment. And if you'd like more content like this, click subscribe and turn on your notifications. Thanks again for watching.